Mark Gilbo, Guilbeau.
And if you would just scoot up to the microphone just a tiny bit. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Fawcett.
Hey, Dr. Gilbo, can you tell the court where you're currently employed?
I work at the Clayton County Medical Examiner's Office.
All right, what do you do with them?
I'm a senior investigator.
Okay. And specifically, what is your role with the Clayton County Medical Examiner's Office?
Medical legal death investigation.
All right. Prior to that, have you been employed anywhere else?
Yes, sir.
And where is that?
Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office.
And what did you do with the Fulton County ME's office?
I was first an investigator and forensic anthropologist, and I got a promotion to senior investigator, and I still did their anthropology work.
Okay. And can you describe and go over your training and education for the jury?
Yeah, I got a bachelor's degree in anthropology from the University of Southwestern Louisiana in 1986. I soon started at the University of Tennessee, where I got my master's and my PhD, all of them in anthropology.
Okay. And after receiving your PhD in anthropology, what did you do career-wise after that?
I started a job at the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office.
Okay. How many total years did you work with Fulton County?
Just shy of 25 years.
Okay. And did you continue to work in the field of anthropology itself?
Yeah, I've been a consultant with DeKalb County Medical Examiner's Office for 20 odd years.
Okay. What is anthropology?
Anthropology is basically the study of people, human beings, whether it be their culture, how they make a living, anything about them, in addition to their history, archaeology, and their physical biology, as in physical anthropology, which is the biological anthropology that I studied.
Okay. And specifically the biology anthropology that you studied, what specific topics do you cover in biology anthropology?
Since biological anthropology covers everything to deal with human bodies, there's a subsection of it called forensic anthropology, which basically applies the knowledge we have of human beings to a legal setting, so that we can determine what we can basically from a human skeleton.
Okay. And throughout your time in Fulton County, as well as your time that you're currently employed in Clayton, did you participate in ongoing training?
Yes.
Was that on a yearly basis?
No, we don't really have yearly training. When I was at Fulton County, we had on and off training dictated by the budget. But yeah, I have been to training since I graduated.
Do you yourself occasionally train other individuals in this field?
I give lectures and talks to different groups periodically.
And as it relates to the forensic anthropology itself, how does that field in particular assist you with your work at the medical examiner's office?
Whenever we find an individual that is unidentified, that is, can't be identified through traditional means, that is, we can't look at the person and determine who they are, if they're decomposing or skeletonized, burned, oftentimes a forensic anthropologist will come in to analyze the skeleton itself. And we can develop a basic profile of the individual to try to help the authorities identify the person.
Okay. And how many times would you say you've had an opportunity to examine, say, a skeleton, as you've testified to this afternoon?
When I was at Fulton, we had probably 2 or 3, sometimes 4 cases a year. So let's say 3 cases a year for 24 years. So you're talking 75 odd cases. And then I was a consultant at the GBI for 10 years in anthropology. And I looked at another 35 or 40, so 150 or so cases.
Okay. And when you conduct an examination of, say, a skeletal remains, for instance, what types of things are you able to determine?
From a skeleton, if we have a complete skeleton, we can determine the ethnicity of the individual, that is whether white, black, Native American, the height of the individual, the sex, the race, ethnicity, race, sex, stature. We can't determine weight.
Types of determinations that you've just testified to, are those the same types of determinations that you made in your different examples as to how many times you've examined skeletal remains at Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office?
Right. I mean, occasionally we would have a whole skeleton, but oftentimes we would only have one individual bone that was found. The majority of our cases were non-human. A bone would be found, it would be brought in, and I could look at it and tell them human, non-human. When it was determined to be non-human, that was the end of it. There was no case.
Okay. Your Honor, this time the state moved to tender into evidence Dr. Mark Gilbo as an expert in forensic anthropology.
No objection.
Go ahead.
Okay. Now, Dr. Gilbo, when you were employed in the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, did you assist in an investigation into the death or the cause of death of Melissa Wolfenbarger?
Yes.
And what was the nature of your assistance with that case itself?
Basically looking at some of the skeletal remains that were found on apparently two separate occasions.
Okay. You were aware of the skull being located in April of '99?
That was the first thing that was found.
All right. And you're also aware of the extremities being located in June of '99?
Yes, sir.
All right. And can you tell the court what happens to a body or a set of remains once it comes in? How is that identified from, say, any other case in the medical examiner's office?
As a case comes in, it's assigned a specific case number so that we can keep track of it. In this particular case, since remains were found at two separate times, we had one case number for the first piece of remains and then a separate case number for the second set of remains. And we're not like the medical records at the hospital where they can join them together under one number. They stay as two separate sets of remains, even though in the reports it'll say associated, these two cases are associated with each other.
Okay. And are you aware whether or not that happened in this particular case, in Melissa Wolfenbarger's case?
Right. At a certain point, they determined that all of these remains were from the same person.
Okay. Do you recall what the two different numbers associated with the skull that came in April and then the remains in June of '99? Are you familiar with that case number that was assigned?
I don't remember specifically, but the first case number was like in the 700 range. And then I think the second case number was in like the 900 range.
Okay.
So there were approximately 200 cases that occurred between the finding of the skull and then the other remains.
And does the medical examiner's office document their findings and investigation in reports?
Yes, sir.
If you were to view a report from the medical examiner's investigation, would that refresh your recollection as to the numbers that were assigned to the skull and remains of Miss Melissa Wolfenbarger?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you this front of the report. If you could look at the numbers and see if that refreshes your recollection as to those two different case numbers.
Yes, sir. That looks like them.
Okay, and what are those case numbers?
99-0798 and 99-0990.
Okay. And what happens after, say, a body or remains are accepted by the medical examiner's office?
Typically, when remains come in, they'll be stored in our cooler until the pathologist, typically in the morning, will come in and the technicians will get the remains out for the pathologist to perform their examination, whether it be an autopsy or whatever may be necessary.
Okay. And are you aware of whether or not that happened in this case?
As far as I'm aware, it did happen. Yes, sir.
Okay. Talk about the distinction between, say, an anthropologist such as yourself conducting an examination of remains versus, say, a pathologist.
Okay. The pathologist is basically looking at more often than not, a fully fleshed person. The point at which the body is too decomposed for them to do everything that they need to do, oftentimes they'll call in an anthropologist, and we will prepare the body, basically examine the skeleton at that point.
All right. At any point, did you get an opportunity to view the remains in the course of your investigation with the ME's office, the remains of Melissa Wolfenbarger?
Yes, sir.
And are you familiar with some of the efforts in place to try to make an identification?
Right. Yeah, there were quite a few sets of dental records that I remember that had come in, people that were missing, and at first all we had was the skull. So teeth were the main thing that we were able to use to try to make an ID. So there were numerous sets of dental records that came in for us to try to make an ID.
Okay. And what is that process in your role as an anthropologist? What methods would you use to try to figure out who this was?
Well, as far as the dental records, we let our forensic dentist do that part of it. But for the rest of the skull, there's certain things that we can use. There's a sinus in your frontal bone that if you take an X-ray of your skull from front to back, you can compare a X-ray before death with an X-ray of the skull, and you can basically overlay one and the other, and they'll match basically almost as good as a fingerprint.
Okay.
So, but you have to have somebody to match it up with.
Was that an issue in terms of conducting an identification, not having a basis to compare it to?
Right. Yeah. There's no big database out there that you can just put information in and it spits out an answer.
All right. At any point, did you attempt to make any types of reconstructions?
I did not, but at some point, I believe they did do a reconstruction, probably having it sent out to the GBI to have the skull reconstructed. As far as putting clay on the skull to make it look like an actual person's face, that's one of the things that we do at a certain point in the investigation.
All right.
Mr. Fawcett?
Yes.
Am I correct? You're about looking at photographs?
That's correct, Judge.
Okay. Can you tell me which ones they are?
Yes. That would be 37, 57, and 61.
57 and 61?
37, 57, and 61.
Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, I'll just remind you again that, as I warned you at the beginning of the trial, that the next series of photographs, as you might have inferred, will be somewhat graphic, given the nature of what they'll show. So I'm giving you a moment to brace yourselves. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Gilbo, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as states exhibits 37, 57, and 61. Can you open that order if you recognize the images depicted on those exhibits?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, are you able to tell from the photographs themselves where those photographs were taken?
Yeah, this was most likely in the autopsy room at the Fulton County Medical Examiner's office
Okay. And you've been in that room yourself?
many times.
All right. And that would have been during that period in when the remains were located. You would have been in the medical examiner's office at that time?
Yes, sir.
You testified as to numbers associated with the case, two numbers in particular for the cases that came in. The case for the skull, I believe you said that was 99-0798. And the case assigned to the extremities, It was 99-0990. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. On those images depicted in 37, 57, and 61, do you see anything representative of those numbers that I just read into the record?
Right, on the little tag that's in the photograph, typically that would include the name of the decedent, the date, the case number, and which doctor is assigned to the case.
Okay. Now, is that labeled as your recollection as records would have been kept in a normal course of business at the medical examiner's office during that period that you were there?
Yes, sir. That's how they would keep information in the photograph.
Okay. And your testimony is that you were present in the office at the time that Melissa Wolfenbarger's remains were being investigated?
Yes, sir.
And what work in particular did you do on this case itself, if you can recall that?
Basically, I looked at the skull. I can't remember exactly who cleaned it off, but the skull was cleaned of tissue, and then it was presented to me to do an analysis, and the skull had been autopsied. So in order to do my measurements, we do a combination of looking at the skull and measurements. Looking at it is one thing. Measurements, you hope that you have a complete skull. Well, since it had been autopsied, the top of the skull had been removed. So I had to reapproximate the top of the skull on the remainder of the cranium with some wax as best I could put it back together. So after that was done, I did do my measurements.
Okay. And what do you mean by measurements?
We have specialized tools that we have a certain set of measurements that we can do that we then plug into a discriminant function formula, and it will determine first whether the individual is male or female, and then also a slightly separate set of measurements will determine the ethnicity of the individual based on people in the United States, Caucasian, African American, or American Indian.
Okay. And can you say, based off of your recollection and your viewing of those exhibits depicted in States Exhibit 37, 57, and 61, that those are the photographs that were taken at or around the autopsy of Melissa Wolfenbarger?
Yes, sir.
And those are the photographs that were taken at the time you were employed with the medical examiner's office?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the state moved to tender in evidence States Exhibits 37, 57, and 61.
Mr. Chairman, 37, 57, and 61 are admitted.
Permission to publish?
Permission granted.
All right, for the record, Your Honor, I'm publishing States Exhibit 37. Okay. Can you see that exhibit on the screen, Dr. Gilbo?
Yes, sir.
All right. What are we looking at?
This is a cervical vertebrae, a vertebrae in your neck.
All right. And is there anything of significance about this particular vertebrae?
The surface. Can I
If you
stand
want to
up?
get up and, yes, you can.
Okay. This is the ground where the spinal cord goes. This would be the back of your neck. This would be the front of your neck. This is the body of the vertebrae, and these are the facets that allow you to turn your head. So even though you can't spin it around, you can look from side to side with the flexibility that this allows. Now, this surface and this surface, this surface and this surface has been damaged. Something has cut through this plane of the vertebrae and separated it from the one that was next to
Dr. Gilbo, have you at any point studied the effects of, say, saws or mechanical instruments on bones themselves?
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by that?
I did a master's thesis on saw marks in bone.
Okay. So is it safe to say you're pretty well versed in the effects of, say, saw and the results of saws on bones?
Yes, sir.
Now I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 57. Let me get this down first.
Objection, can we approach?
Sure.
All right.
To be clear, I think based on the sidebar that the objection was withdrawn. Is that fair, Mr. McDermott?
For now.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Bossett.
All right. All right, so for the record, publishing State's Exhibit 57. Now, Dr. Gilbo, if you wouldn't mind stepping down from the seat, and you see the same, if I can get you to,
And I'll just ask, you're perfectly fine where you are, but when you do speak, if you'll just try and speak up because you have your back to me in the court reporter. Thank you, sir.
is that the same medical examiner number reference to the report?
Yes, sir.
All right. And what are we looking at here? You can tell that from that photograph.
This is a long bone. I'm not sure which one it is just from this photo, but it's either the shaft of one of the bones of the arm or leg. I can't tell just from this photograph.
And can you see anything else depicted on Exhibit 57 of significance?
Yeah, it appears that this bone was cut with a saw.
Okay. And why do you say that?
There are striations here that are consistent with a saw. There's a groove here that's consistent with a saw blade. And then it's, apparently it was cut through up to a certain point and then the remainder of the bone broke.
Okay.
It was cut all the way through.
All right. If I could have you remain up there, I'm going to show you one more exhibit. Now showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 61. Can you tell the court what we're looking at? Is that well, first, yeah. Is that another photograph from the autopsy of Melissa Rockwell?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And is there anything of significance that you observe or are able to observe on that State's exhibit?
Yeah, this is a cross section of the long bone. So this is a bone that has been cut completely through. And you can see the striations here. This is typically what we see when a saw cuts through an object, in this case, a piece of bone.
Now, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 66. You see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Is that the type of saw that would make the types of marks on there? I'm not asking specific blade.
Right.
But is that the type of instrument that could cause the marks depicted on those exhibits?
Yes, sir.
One moment, Judge.
Sure.
Now, Dr. Gilbo, we're talking about remains from April and June of 1999. Was the medical examiner's office able to observe and notate what appeared to be tool marks on those bones at that time?
Yes, sir.
So well before 2003, is that safe to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at the point when you got involved in the case, it would have been back in that 99 period when the remains were located.
Yes, sir.
All right, that's all I have, Judge.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott, questions for this witness?
Yes, ma'am.
You referred to the skull as having the flesh cleaned. Is that the process?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You were nodding. I just want to make
Okay.
the record clear.
Works for me, but only me. Is that the process that it speaks of in the reports of soaking the head in bleach?
Right. That's one of the ways that they use to try to remove some of the flesh from the bone.
I see. And did they use other methods for other of the remains?
Sometimes we will heat up the remains in some water with detergent. We're basically trying to remove the flesh, and heat is one of the ways that we can do that.
I see. You mentioned something about taking measurements of the skull.
Yes, sir.
Is that what's known as the Giles-Elliott discrimination?
That's one of the ways. Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you perform that in this case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You could look at those two documents and tell me if you recognize them.
Yep. That's the
You can say what they are.
okay. That's the graph and the measurements that we take typically.
And the second one,
And the second one is just all my measurements.
there's a lot of measurements in there.
Yes, sir.
How many measurements do you have to take to complete this process?
There's 8 basic measurements. And then for some of the discriminant functions, you don't use all of them. But people smarter than me have figured out how to do this. I just use their method.
Okay.
And we basically plug the measurements into the formula, and it spits out an answer that we can graph on a chart.
And these are the graphs you're speaking of?
That's the graphs, yes,
And the
sir.
graphs tell you whether the head is male or female,
Based on the measurements that are taken, yes,
and
sir.
whether it's a black person or a white person.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you know when this method was created?
Oh, a lot of it was based on anatomical collections. They used some of the remains of service people that were killed in the Korean War back in the 40s and 50s, as I can recollect.
Okay. So this is a method that had been around since the 40s and 50s.
As far as I'm aware, yes, sir.
Okay. And based on your conclusions on those calculations, you returned a conclusion that it was a white male skull.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you remember saying at the beginning of your direct examination that one of the functions that you guys perform is that you can develop a basic profile of the individual?
That's correct.
And in this case, you thought the basic profile of the individual was a white male?
That's correct.
All right, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Fawcett, any additional questions?
Yes. Dr. Gilbo, was there any information as to damage to the skull that was recovered, Mr. Wolfenbarger?
Yeah, I think there was some minor damage to the skull just from being out in the field, but then the top of the cranium was removed at the time of the autopsy prior to me being able to look at it.
Okay. And we're talking about the measurements. What are you comparing those, what is the standard that you're comparing the measurements to?
The discriminant function was developed by the Giles and Elliott crew. And basically they measured a whole bunch of skulls and then were able to look at certain measurements that were more male and some that were more female. So depending on where the measurements that you took fell in the spectrum, you would classify it either as male or female.
Okay. And what is the purpose of, say, the investigative tool? What does that serve, or what stage does that serve in the investigation process?
We're trying to develop a profile of who we might be looking for. But with human populations, not everybody is the same. So that we're trying to quantify something that removes the human judgment from the equation. Everybody should be able to take a measurement the same. Whereas I can look at something and say, that box is square. Well, another person would say, well, that box is a rectangle. So it removes hopefully removes the judgment part of the equation.
Okay. Well, what is the answer to explain, the explanation for Dr. Gilbo initially determined based on that scale that it was male? So how do we get to that point, and what's the explanation for that?
What we do is done by human beings. We don't know what the answer is. All we can do is take measurements, and whatever the answer comes out with, that's what we go with. In this particular case, it came out, the measurements declared that it was a male, when in fact, in hindsight, it was a female. But as with everything in a biological system, there are some that are slightly different from the others. So there's variability within human populations. So the combination of the skull being autopsied and possibly that it was into the male range being a female, it's,
Okay.
just one of those things.
And did that contribute in any way to, say, the identification itself?
Yeah, it by us thinking that it's a male, and so we're looking for males, we're not looking for females. So yeah, that was kind of a problem with the identification in the beginning.
Okay. And you're familiar with the name Dr. Joseph Parker?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with where he was conducting his duties as ME at that time?
Yes, sir.
And where was he conducting his duties as ME?
He worked for us at Fulton County. He also worked out at the GBI, and he was also the medical examiner for Bibb County down in Macon.
Okay. And are you aware of a headless corpse that was located, male headless corpse that was located close to Macon during that period of time?
Right. Dr. Parker generally worked on the weekends, and I believe that these remains came in on a Friday. So when he came in on Saturday, this was one of his cases. So he had just come from Macon where a body had been found with no head. Well, he shows up the next day and there's a head with no body. So the assumption from the beginning was, well, we're going to see if this head matches this body.
Okay. So early on in the investigation, there was a theory that might be the case.
Right.
All right. And did that contribute, or was that a factor in the overall investigation into determining the ID?
I think it had an influence. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. That's all I have, Judge.
Mr. McDermott, anything else?
Do you remember about what time it was in the United States that we began using DNA testing for identification purposes?
As far as I'm aware, it was maybe the late 80s when it became
Right.
available.
And it was certainly available in the late 90s, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you wanted to identify who this head belonged to, right?
Yes, sir.
So why was not the first thing that you did preserve DNA?
That I looked at the bones, not the tissue. That would have been the prudent thing to do, preserve tissue before anything else is done.
Okay. All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Fasette, anything else?
Nothing from this witness, Judge.
Thank you, sir. You may step down. Your
Thank you,
excuse as a witness.